Hey guys, my name is Haley, and we're gonna film my wrap up for the end of 2025 because I haven't wrapped anything up since like September ish. So we're just gonna go through all the books I read in the last little part of the year, and then I'll get on to my favorites videos, which will hopefully be out within the next week or so, maybe week or two, depending on how often I can get everything uploaded. But Happy New Year! We're gonna say a very happy I'm not going to miss you to 2025 because it was probably one of the worst years of my life. If you want an update on that, I have plenty of videos, a couple videos back before Vlogmas of my time being homeless because of a lot of the things that have been happening in the United States this year. So, yeah, I'm just going to do a wrap up. These are going to be very rapid fire. Like, if I have stuff to say, I'll say it. If not, I'm just going to move on right on with my day. So I'm hoping to get more than one video filmed today, and I haven't filmed in probably 2 weeks because I haven't filmed a sit-down video in probably 3 months, so we'll see how this goes. If you see cuts, no you didn't. So we left off with Calabasas. So the next book that I read after that was You Weren't Meant to Be Human by Andrew Joseph White. Spoiler, this will be on my favorite books of the year. Andrew Joseph White is one of my favorite authors, and I read all of their books last year, and I had favorites on my last year top whatever number I did for last year as well. So I loved this. Huge trigger warnings for mainly pregnancy if you have an issue with pregnancy, and that's probably why I liked it so much, because it scared the shit out of me as somebody who has a deathly fear of pregnancy in general. If that is a triggering subject for you, please proceed with caution, or quite honestly, maybe don't read it, because it was brutal. And I'm gonna leave it at that. But I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. And then I did a reread actually of We Have Reached the End of Our Show right before I went and saw Allie. I have a vlog, I'll leave that link down below, of me going to LA while I was living in Vegas. We drove to LA and we went to her book signing. And I wanted to annotate the book so she could see it. And I sent her a bunch of annotations and stuff as we went back and forth on Instagram for a little bit there. So highly recommend this book. This was her debut book. This is also going to be on my favorites of the year. It was just such a special experience. Also 5 stars. And then I read Fable for the End of the World, which is essentially a Hunger Games type topic of very much like live streamed people killing each other, not necessarily like in an arena, but rich versus poor. I really, really liked it and would love to read more books by Ava Reed because I gave this 4.5 stars. It was very good, and I would love to own the special edition someday because I've seen it in person. I've seen it at like half price books. It's so pretty, and I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend that if you're looking for a fun dystopian, like Hunger Games-esque thing. And then I read Lucky Day by Chuck Tingle. Chuck Tingle is one of my favorite authors, and this book takes place in Vegas, so it was very fun to read while I was living there for a couple of months. But I give this 4 stars, maybe like 4.25. It's really fun. It's very goofy. It's very Chuck Tingle. If you've read any of his books, he does like mostly like sci-fi, sometimes horror, with like a weird twist. And that's very much what this was. And then I read A Short Stay in Hell. This is literally a type of book where it's just somebody's life going through hell, but as if hell is just infinite, like time, but almost time doesn't exist, but you're there for hundreds of years, and it's very mundane. If you've ever seen the episode of Supernatural, this is what this reminded me of. I'm sorry. If you've ever seen the episode of Supernatural where Crowley's hell is quite literally just people waiting in line for the rest of time, it reminded me a lot of that, except the whole gimmick in this one was that you had to find the book that, like, I forget what the thing was, but you had to find a book and that was only your book, and it was in like millions and millions and billions of books. Like, it was a giant library, and you had to find your book. It was really interesting. I gave it 3.75 stars. And then I read Cruel Honey by Piper CJ. I really love Piper's books. This was a little island slasher, if kill all billionaires. So if you're into that, I do recommend this. I gave this also 3.75 stars. It's very much a slasher. It's very fun. I think her cover got, what's it called, like banned from Amazon, and she had to like make a discreet cover, which is wild when it comes to like other romance covers that you've seen. But anyway, I enjoyed this one if you like a good slasher. And then I finished White Evangelical Racism. I'm also trying to figure out side tangent here, how I want to do my like favorite nonfiction of the year, because I read a lot of nonfiction. So let me know if you would like rather see a video of just all the nonfiction that I read, which is probably like a quarter of what I read in the year of the 118 books that I read, or if you just want my favorites of nonfiction, because I'm still trying to decide that one. But I finished this one. This is by Anthea Butler. This is literally about racism in evangelical spaces. It is very eye-opening, and as somebody who came from a space that very much had an issue with that, I highly recommend reading this, because I feel like a lot of evangelicals never even think about the fact that that might be an issue in their circles. And yeah, I gave this 5 stars. This definitely started my kick of reading a bunch of like ex-evangelical Christian nationalist books that I read over the last few months. And then I read This Is My Body. This I barely remember. I remember not liking it and thinking it is almost an exact copy of The Exorcist. I apparently gave it 3 stars. I think it's more like 2.5. I did not like it. I think I remember the ending being more interesting than the entire rest of the book, but other than that, did not enjoy. And then I read Hot for Slayer by Ali Hazelwood. This is her little novella about this witch and a witch hunter, I believe, and they're like chasing each other through time, and they fall in love. It was really cute. It's very Ali Hazelwood. Gave it 4 stars. Then I read The Power Worshippers by Catherine Stewart. This is very much how did Christian nationalism get to the point that it is today? And it leads into like all of them being involved in like NAR and being involved in January 6th and all of that. So it's very interesting if you don't know any of this, if you were in these sectors like me and didn't know a lot of this was happening because it wasn't your specific denomination. Very informative, very scary, very concerning. 5 stars. And then I read Nelfs by Sydney Williams. This was a little like gremlin inspired horror book that I really liked, that surprisingly had like a biblical twist to it. And I'm not going to say anything more than that because I think it was a fun twist, but I gave this 4 stars. Then I read The Color of Compromise, which I believe I listened to on audio, by Jamar Tisby. I've also realized that he is in the deconstruction spaces and talks with a lot of the people that I follow in deconstruction spaces, of people who have left the churches or at least left their specific culty versions of churches. I really enjoyed this. It deals a lot with racism, so be aware of that. And then I read Such Lovely Skin. I've wanted to read this for I think at least the last October, and I never got around to it. This was also spooky season. I didn't read nearly as much horror, which is always the case. If you can hear the air purifier in the background, no, you can't. My allergies have been so bad this season. I don't know what's going on. To be fair, I'm in a new state. I just had a whole like coughing fit over the fucking heat coming on. So anyways, I think I was talking about Such Lovely Skin. This is a horror book. It is about a Twitch streamer, and she thinks she has a doppelganger. It was fun. It did not live up to the hype that I had built up for this in the like year or so that I wanted to read it. I gave it 3.5 stars probably. That also was one of the last books I read before we became homeless for like a little over a month. And I didn't read anything for like, I want to say 3 weeks. Besides this next book, and that is Wake Up and Open Your Eyes by Clay McLeod Chaplin. I read another book by him called Whisper Down the Light years ago that I really want to reread because I feel like it was like right book, wrong time, because I adored this. And if anybody you know, or you are someone who has lost family members, friends, whoever, anybody in your life to the cult of Trump, to the cult of MAGA, to the cult of all of the horrific things that are happening right now, and going, what happened to my family member? Please read this. Like, it literally has an entire storyline that follows that exact thought, but in a horror, like, supernatural almost twist. It is horrific. I will give you, like, there are things of sexual assault, there are things of, like, gore, especially in this. But I read it in one night with no intentions to do that and hadn't read anything in weeks. So this will also be one of my favorite books of the year, but it deals with the reality of losing someone to literally Fox News specifically in such a clever way, and I loved it so much. And then the next book I read, I didn't read very much at all in November because I was unhoused for most of it. I ended up reading The Cult of Trump by Steve Hassan. I have checked out some of his stuff. I've heard this before. I wanted to read this for a while. I gave this 4 stars. It wasn't nearly as informative as I wanted it to be, but I also think it was because this is a subject I was already so informed about that I feel like I didn't learn anything new from it. And if you want to get into like a lot of the psychological reasons why people end up in that cult, I do think this is helpful. But if you're already aware of a lot of the background and how they came to power and all of that, it's a foundational book for that type of thing for people who literally don't know how he got to the point that he is and why he is the way he is. So I tentatively recommend it if you're interested, but it wasn't my favorite. And then I read Star Spangled Jesus. This is by April LaJoy. She is a co-member of a podcast, one of my favorite podcasts that I listen to, called The Tim and April Show. They talk about deconstruction content. They talk about Christian nationalism. I've wanted to read her books for years, and it was on sale on Kindle, so I picked it up this year and read it, and I loved it. 5 stars. I love April's story because it is one of the more relatable ones too, because she came from a Pentecostal background, which is the church cult that I left, or a very similar one to the one I was in. So highly recommend her book. And then I read The Seven Mountains Mandate by Matthew Bodie. I was surprised by this one because I was reading this not too long after what happened with Charlie Kirk. And in most of the Christian nationalist books that I read, which I read a lot of them at once over the course of these like 3 or 4 months, there is the inevitable mention in like chapter based on Charlie Kirk and how influential he was in those movements. And this one really hit home. It like really encapsulated, I felt, well, and how important he was to that movement. And this book also came out like right after what happened to him happened. So I can only imagine that there were people back behind the scenes going, I don't know if this is the best time to release this book, because I'm sure if this made its rounds in any way, shape, or form, it would be boycotted. I don't know if that happened. I don't know if anything happened like with this author getting hate for it, but I hope that he didn't, because it's very informative. And I highly recommend it to anybody who doesn't know what the Seven Mountains Mandate is, who's very unaware of Christian nationalism. This is a great starting point for understanding how they got to power, who was involved in it, who pushed the movement forward, and all of that. It's very, very informative. Highly recommend. I read Wild Faith. This also was about Christian nationalism. This was a time period where I read like 4 of them at once, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't remember which one this was. I remember really liking it and giving it 4 stars. That was about it. And then I read The Longest Con. I know this one was more about the politics side of how Trump rose to power as opposed to Christian nationalists, but it weaved the two together by the end. Also gave that 4 stars. And then I read The True Happiness Project, which I listened to an audio and don't really remember, I'm not gonna lie. Apparently I gave it 4 stars. I feel like it was more of 3 because I literally don't remember which book this was. And I don't think it was necessarily Christian nationalism. I would definitely have to look that up. But also, this is a very tumultuous time in my lifetime, so that could be part of the reason. I don't think it's the book's fault. I needed a book to get back into reading fiction because I hadn't read any fiction in like well over a month, and that's unusual for me. So I finally read The Eye of the Bedlam Bride. This is book 6 in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series that I've been adoring this year. I gave this 4 stars. I have 1 book left, and I'm actively pretending it doesn't exist because then I won't have anything to read until we get a release date for the next book, and I don't want to deal with that right now. One of the last books I read in November was Chain Gang All Stars, which I really liked his other book that came out like Friday Black or Black Friday. I don't remember. It was short stories. But I really, really enjoyed this. This deals a lot with the way that racism is rampant in our prison systems, especially in the US, and like gives it an almost gladiator coliseum twist to it. And the ending deeply confused me. I give this 4.5 stars. It's very important, and a lot of the quotes were so hard-hitting. So I do recommend this one. If you've never heard of it, or if you've seen it going around and haven't read it yet, please do. And I'm gonna take a break because I'm having a coughing fit. Give me a second. Okay, we're back. We're gonna try to finish this video. Anyway, we're on to December. I read a decent amount in December. So the next book I read was Fairytale, which I wish had lived up to the hype. I've heard so many romantasy specific people who love romantasy say they loved this. And I wish that I did. There was like one storyline that I found very interesting, and it was like the last one we got any answers for. I also hated the romance in the first part of the book, and I'm not going to elaborate because it will lead to spoilers if I try and explain why. Did not like it. I gave this 3 stars. I think that was being generous. It's more of a 2.5. And I read Ring Shout, which deals with the KKK if they were literal monsters, like shape shifting monsters. And it's a novella. It's like less than 200 pages. Very important. Very hard read. 4.5 stars. Definitely recommend, but cautiously. And then I finally finished 1984. I started reading this when we were driving cross country coming back from Vegas when we were starting our unhoused homelessness journey. We took about 4 or 5 days driving back, and then really didn't have anywhere to go for a couple weeks. So I just didn't touch this book. After listening to it in the car with my partner who had already read it as a child, and I never grew up having to read this book, and I was like, this should be classified as a horror book in 2025. I gave this 4 stars. I liked everything but the romance. The romance was the part we got to where I was like, I'm done. Didn't pick it up for 2 months, and then I finally finished the audiobook on my own once I figured out where we left off, and I did like the ending a lot more. The romance I felt very misplaced, but that's just, I'm not used to having that much romance in that serious of a dystopian, and that's my opinion on that. And then I read The Nightmare Before Christmas. This was so cute. I apparently gave it 4.75. This is definitely a 5 stars. I thought this was so cute. It's one of the cutest Christmas books I've read in a few years. It has a little like magic quality to it. It's queer. It's so adorable. I love this so much, and it sent me on a journey of wanting to read everything that Sarah Rosh has ever written. And I remembered that she had a series, like a fantasy series, that came out years ago when I first started Booktube. If you didn't know, I've had this channel for like 8 years, and the algorithm doesn't like that I've pivoted my content because I started off doing Christian content when I was in a Christian cult. Well, also what I was reading, but at that time it was a lot of Christian cult nonsense. So if you would subscribe, I would really appreciate that, as I'm trying to get out of algorithm hell of having this page for like 8 years and then not posting on it for 2 years once I got out of the cult, and now I'm trying to rebuild it, and I've been doing that for the last like 2 years almost. But yeah, I read this book and it really made me want to go back and reread or read a lot of Sarah Rosh's older books. And then I immediately jumped into the sequel, which was not nearly as Christmassy, but I needed to read it, and that's Go Luck Yourself. And this is like the brother. It's also queer. I love it. I want the like story of the sapphic couple in here. Please give that to me, Sarah Rosh. Thank you. And then I read Krampus. This has been a book I've had on like every TBR at least for the last 2 years, if not longer. I think longer because I read The Child Thief a long time ago, back towards the beginning of my channel. And this was like a 3.75, close to a 4 star. I liked it. I thought it was funny the way that Krampus went around trying to convince people to like worship him instead of like Santa and the Christian God and everything. I found it more funny than horror, which I'm used to Brahms' books being more horror. Like Sleuthwood is my favorite of his books. And this one just felt goofy to me. So I gave it 3.75 stars. And then I read Holiday Romance by Catherine Walsh, and I want to read everything that Catherine Walsh has ever written. I gave this 5 stars. I have always heard her books described as friends to lovers, and I notoriously hate that trope when it comes to romance. So I was like, I don't think they're for me. I was wrong. This first one is about these two people who travel on a plane to Ireland every year, and it takes place over the course of many years of them realizing, oh, they think we like each other. And it was actually very cute. I really like the Irish family that's involved. I love all of the side characters in this. I love this. It was 5 stars. I read the sequel, which is Snowed In, which I liked slightly less, but I liked it honestly almost as much. I gave it 4.5 stars. I just didn't like the couple as much in this one, but I also really over time like tend to like books that take place over a long period of time, especially when it comes to a lot of my favorite romances. Like for example, Once Every December. What's it called? I don't remember that December book where it takes place over like 10 years, and then also You Again. I also really, really liked, and that takes place over many, many years. So I think Holiday Romance was more my thing than Snowed In, but they were both very cute. I really liked the like coupley nature of being snowed into a cabin in the mountains. That was very cute. Really enjoyed 4.5 stars. And then I read Good Spirits by BK Borison. I have wanted to read BK Borison for years, and maybe honestly this is a sign that I might next year, because their biggest book, The Love Lights Farms, I'm like, I'm not gonna like that because it's Friends to Lovers. So were these last two books that I really enjoyed. So we'll see, because I did like their writing. This is A Christmas Carol retelling. It's very cute. It's very cheesy. It's very fluffy. I liked it. I gave it 4 stars. And then the last book of the year that I read was The Merriest Misters by Timothy Janofsky. I read You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince, is that what it's called? Years ago. Really enjoyed this. I like this one just as much. It's cute. It's about this queer couple, this gay couple who are like, they become Santa, Santa and Mrs. Claus. Very similar to like the Santa Claus movie, like with Tim Allen, but it was very cute. I liked it. It was 3.5 stars. I will also, full disclosure, did not finish it and intentionally didn't finish it because I want to read the rest of the stories next year for the holiday season. But I read the first story of Happily Ever After. Is that what it's called? And then like removed it from all of my shelves because I wasn't going to finish it before the end of the year. And I'm one of those people that can't go into the new year with a book from last year. OCD does not allow. I read the first story because I wanted to know about this one character because it's set in it's short stories from the realm of people from Holiday Romance and Snowed In and those families. And I really wanted to know about this specific couple. And then I'm going to save the other, I think, 2 or 3 stories for the next holiday season. So, full disclosure, I did read like part of that, but I'm not counting it towards any of my goals or numbers or anything. So, yeah, those are all the books that I read at the end of 2025. 2025 was a rough year, and there's the meme going around of, nice, thanks 2025, let's never do this again. And that's basically how I feel about it. But let me know what the last book that you read in the year of 2025 was in the comments down below. If you don't want to actually interact, I understand. Leave me a snowflake emoji or a couple of them in the comments. Just interact. Please like the video. Please subscribe. I'm going to try and get better at reminding people to do that because I really want to take the YouTube seriously and get out of YouTube algorithm hell in 2026. So I would appreciate it if you would interact in some way. But thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.